The Soybean School on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by Pride Seeds, High Stick NT, and Cruiser Max Vibrance Beans.
Bern Tobin here for the Soybean School on Real Agriculture, joined by Aaron Stefanis, market agronomist, Pride Seeds. Hey, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for coming.
Hey, we are near Elmira, Ontario, and we're at the location where Pride had their precision ag plot this year. And I want to go back to some of the work you did here this summer, right on this spot, about trying to figure out what's the best population for soybeans, and whether it's 100,000 versus 200,000. Yeah. What were you guys up to?
Perfect. Well, thanks, Bernard. Yeah, that's exactly what we were doing here. So the biggest thing we were looking at, so we partnered with Veritas. They helped us write the scripts, and what we were looking at is essentially the return on investment on your seed. We all hear, I'm in the seed industry, seed's getting more expensive. So let's get the best value out of the seed. And how do we do that? Well, we made different population blocks in the field, replicated it, and the idea was to use that data to find which is the best planting rate for each variety.
Awesome. Now, let's go back 4 months ago, because we were here and recorded, you working in the plots and talking about what was in that plot. And after that, we're going to talk about what you found out in your research.
Sounds good. And I'm sitting here in the middle, the divide of, so we're in 30-inch rows, and on either side of me is 100,000 plants per acre and 200,000 plants per acre. So the idea is just to kind of get a visual of what this means, and obviously later on at harvest, make sure that the return on investment for more seeds is there, and if the yield's there. So if we want to start off to the left, so at 100,000, visually, and all the way from the beginning of out, these beans were a little bit behind, and a little bit less green and not as growthy. If you want to look into the canopy, you can see we kind of have a little bit more room for the beans. So the beans are branching a fair bit more, and obviously if more branching means more flowers. But if you look at solar radiation, so having these solar panels collecting light, which is the whole negative of 30-inch rows, you actually see less of a canopy or slower canopy closure with the lower plants per acre than you do in the higher. So moving over on this side to the higher plants per acre, and you can even see visually they're taller. And why are they taller? Because we have more competition. They're growing for sunlight. They're always wanting to get more and more sunlight, these plants. So because they're denser, they're going to throw out more leaves, be more aggressive in growth. Now, I said on this side we had lots of branches. Over here we have less branches but more seeds. So it'll be interesting to see how that equates to yield, because at the end of the day, yes, if I were to look right now, I would say 200,000 plants per acre in 30-inch rows. Very advantageous. You're getting that canopy closure faster. They're more aggressive. They're more growthy. But at the end of the day, it's the pods. The pods are what matter. You got to also take into account that it's a drier year, so we could have more pod abortion because you just have more competition in here. So there's a lot of factors agronomically and physiologically that's going on in here that we're going to have to wait till yield. But it's neat to come out in the field and see the observations that we're seeing right now.
So there you have it. We're back here now. It's November 15th and everything's gone. Yep. But you've got all the research in your head.
That's right.
Talk about what you've learned. Starting off with standability.
Well, it's actually interesting. So not all varieties are created equally, and some varieties, when you got that high dense stand that we kind of saw in that video earlier, they just didn't have the legs to stand through it. So we definitely saw a yield taper off there. I might even go back to that variety I was standing in, for example. That variety stood like a tree from essentially 100,000 all the way up to 200,000, and believe it or not, that variety, the highest return on investment, even with the seeding rates and everything put into effect, was actually the highest return on investment was at 200,000. It stood, it put more beans out, and the other thing I might mention, it was actually a little bit of an older bean. It's an older bean in our lineup, and you maybe had our breeding was more focused towards the narrow row, where our new varieties are more focused on wider row. Our breeding is all on 30-inch rows now, and we're seeing more branching in the plants and putting more pods on. And in fact, the new varieties all actually had a tremendous payback at low populations.
So what about yield? I mean, overall, if you're looking at that difference between 100,000 and 200,000, this was one basic variety. one specific variety, but overall, what's the yield difference?
So actually there was a tremendous yield difference compared to when you look at it on a, so what we look at it as equity. So it wasn't just all yield. We took an average price of bag, an average selling price, and we took that equity and used that as our driver instead of straight yield, because at the end of the day, like I said earlier, it's all about dollars in the bank, and that's what we want to drive forward with our knowledge. So there is actually a lot of varieties, specifically the newer varieties, specifically the Extend varieties. We're actually, believe it or not, 100,000 plants per acre was the highest profitability.
Wow.
Now that's a new road that we got to look at with management, because even myself, I'm not comfortable with 100,000 plants per acre planting rate. There's a whole bunch of different variables that come into effect there agronomically, but it's just interesting to see that change from, say, an older variety that the highest profitability was 200,000 to the newer varieties where we were looking at 100.
Awesome. Hey, great learnings. Thank you so much. We'll come back here next year.
Yep, sounds great.
Awesome.